Hello, my name's Roger Watson and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Advanced Nursing, the editor of Nursing Open, and I'm an editorial board member of the Wiki Journal of Medicine. And in this session I want to talk to you briefly about open access. Open access has a history of probably no more than about 20 years, although in the last 10 years it's become much more prominent and indeed much more popular. There's much more pressure these days to publish open access. That pressure comes from grant awarding bodies, from charities, from university funding bodies, from governments and from international organisations like Plan S. The idea is to make research information much more available to the general public and much more easy to share between academics and other people. Now, academics mainly publish in academic journals, and there are still many what I would call traditional academic journals. These are journals that do not publish open access. These days there are very few hard copy journals, but they publish volumes online. Sometimes they publish hard copy, but they're purely traditional. In other words, they're pay to view. People publish in those journals and then either a library or some other institution, or rarely an individual, will pay to view the contents of the journal. That's the model we've lived for the last 40 or 50 years in academia. However, these days, open access, as I say, is much more popular, and there are now a growing number of open access journals, and we'll come to them later. In the meantime, some journals are developing hybrid models whereby they publish traditional pay-to-view articles and also open access articles. And open access is made available through different ways. Essentially, most open access has to be paid for. Now, there are three essential models of open access, and I'm going to explain those to you and then discuss them. First of all, gold open access. Gold open access is where you pay, or someone pays, your institution or a researcher, grant awarding body pays, in order to make your article open access by some means, whether in a hybrid journal or in an open access journal. Once it's open access, anyone can access it, anyone can download it, and anyone can read it. Now, in good journals, this tends to be quite expensive. You can pay $3,000 to make your article open access. The reason for this is that you're paying to compensate the publisher for the money that they will lose by selling pay to view. You're essentially buying the copyright of your article. Now, under the gold route, papers are published under a series of Creative Commons licenses. This is not the place to go into the details of Creative Commons licenses. They're not very exciting, but there are 6 different models, and these models allow different kinds of open access, different levels of open access. So they allow you and they allow others to do different things with your article. The most permissive open access license or Creative Commons license is the CC BY license, and this allows people to do almost anything they want with your material, provided they acknowledge you. But there are more restrictive open access models. Most journals use the CC BY model, but some use others, and some indeed give you a choice. As I say, it's not the place to go into this in detail, but you should become aware of open access licensing and Creative Commons licensing if you're going to publish open access. Make sure you know what you can do with your article if you're paying for open access. So that's the gold route. It's quite simple. You pay a publisher and they allow you to make your article open access. The second model of open access is called the green route. Now, the green route is becoming very popular these days, and the green route is the means whereby you can make your article open access, but not in the final published version, but in the final accepted version of the article, the one that the publisher agrees to publish before they finally produce it as a PDF. And these are usually made available through institutional repositories. And again, this is happening because of the pressure to publish open access. So, under the green route to open access, you can publish your final accepted copy, but you have to be aware that journals and publishers put different embargo periods. Very few publishers allow immediate access even to that copy, and very few allow you ultimately to put up the final accepted copy. Most have an embargo period of 6 months to a year. Some have an embargo period of a year. However, if you work in a university that has a repository, then the people running your repository should understand the restrictions on use. Now, the green route doesn't cost you any money, and once the embargo period is up, people can access that copy of the article for free, but they can't do what they like with it. It's not being published under any kind of license. Now, there's even a third model of open access. This is very rare and it is developing, and it's referred to as the diamond model of open access, and in some places it's referred to as the platinum model of open access. The essential feature of this model, which I'll call the diamond model, is that no money changes hands at any point. You don't pay to view and you don't pay to publish. But there are very few diamond open access journals. As you can imagine, someone has to pay at some point to establish these journals. One example happens to be the journal of which I'm an editorial board member, the Wiki Journal of Medicine. That is a diamond open access journal, and it does publish under a Creative Commons license to allow reuse with some restrictions of the material that's been published. You don't have to pay to submit your article. You have to essentially write it yourself in a Wikipedia form, and then people don't have to pay to read it. In fact, they can read it as a preprint. It goes through a very open review process, and then it becomes published in a final form. But I emphasise the diamond route. You don't pay to publish and you don't pay to view, but it's very rare. But I imagine that this will be developing more in the future. Now, your decision to publish open access may be out of your hands. You may be obliged to do it by research grant awarding bodies, or by your university, or by the system within which you work. Otherwise, you have to make a decision as to whether you want to publish open access or not. Never use your own money to pay open access, it's far too expensive. But if you do have the funds, I think it's a good idea to try and publish your best outputs open access. There is some evidence, growing evidence, not particularly strong, but there's some evidence that it increases citations. It certainly increases downloads and reads of your article. So it certainly helps you to make more impact with your research. So open access is a good thing, but it does cost money if you want to publish immediately by the gold route. Do be aware, and this is really a separate topic, but do be aware that there are many open access predatory publishers out there. These journals will take your money. They may publish your article or they may not, but they'll take your money, and if they do publish it, the article will not go through any kind of review process. It will go up almost as it is. These journals don't aim to provide any kind of quality, they just aim to get your money. There's plenty of material on the Inago website about open access predatory journals. So do be aware. Open access is a virtue, but it's led to the development of these predatory journals. Never be tempted to use them. They often offer to publish for very, very small fees. The small fee indicates that they're not running a very credible operation. So just to recap, open access is becoming increasingly popular, and in some places in the world becoming increasingly compulsory. There are still traditional journals, but there are hybrid journals developing which publish both open access and by the traditional pay-to-view route, and there are now an increasing number of purely open access journals. There are three models: the gold route, which you pay for, the green route, which you don't pay for but you're restricted to publishing usually the final accepted copy, and the diamond route, where no money changes hands, but I do emphasise that that's a very rare commodity so far, but I think it will develop. And finally, do be aware of the predatory open access publishers. I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for listening.